So we have one more person to call up on the stage today, and I am personally pretty excited about this. It's always great when your friends can join you on stage to talk about the cloud, right? So as I bring up this next person, Craig McLuckie has had a long, storied career in this space. I'm not saying you're old, Craig. I'm just saying it's been long. While at Google, he helped co-found and co-create Kubernetes. He went off from there and founded Heptio, this company that, I don't know if you caught the news, but got acquired by VMware the end of last year and is now VP of R&D at VMware. So I'd like to welcome Craig to come up on stage and talk with me a little bit. Come on up. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, have a seat on these chairs right over here.
Very comfortable chairs, I remember from yesterday.
Yes, they're very comfortable chairs. So, anything new this week?
Well, it's been exciting. I don't know if all of you have caught the news, but a lot of interesting things happening in the ecosystem and certainly in the corporate landscape, and excited to have an opportunity to talk about it with you for a bit.
Well, you have had an exciting, God, what month is this? You've had exciting, I was going to say 6 months, but I feel like it's been probably a little longer than that. But the last year in particular has been exciting with the acquisition of Heptio by VMware. You know, going from Google to Heptio to VMware, you've been part of this cloud-native ecosystem for many years now. Has your perspective changed over the last couple of years through this journey?
Yeah, it's been interesting for me. I mean, if you look at my career, I started at Google, and even before I did Kubernetes, I was responsible for building an infrastructure service, offering, which was Google Compute Engine. Then, did Kubernetes, and then, all of this. And I think I've learned a couple things along that journey. The first and foremost was, customers don't like getting letters from the future, surprisingly, right? Like, it's so tempting when you're, sort of in an environment like that to write these letters from the future and say, hey, everyone, the future's this beautiful, bright place. Come join us here. And, for a lot of organizations, as they're embarking on this journey, when they're starting to think about cloud-native technologies, et cetera, they need a lot of help, right? It's not obvious how to go from this world of, and a lot of people say legacy, and I hate legacy, right? Like, as my friend Joe always says, if you don't have legacy, you don't have money, right? Like, I prefer the word heritage. It's like it has a little more respect. But going from this world of heritage applications into the sort of more progressive cloud-native world is hard. And so I think the first thing I've learned is that a lot of organizations need some help on that journey, and they want organizations to walk with them. And I'd say the second thing that I've observed is that it's still too interesting. Like, infrastructure technology should be boring, and it's great for business that it's interesting when you're a little company like Heptio. But we still have a lot of work to do as an industry to make the infrastructure technologies fade into the background and really bring forwards the technologies that developers interface with that enable them to develop the code that drives the business, et cetera. And so, as I've sort of seen my journey and really thought about my own sort of personal mission on this, it's don't write letters from the future, really walk the journey with organizations, and let's make that infrastructure technology really, really boring.
Like boring so as when we don't even think about it.
You don't even
anymore.
think about it. You shouldn't be
Just
thinking about Kubernetes. I'm so tired of talking about Kubernetes. I want to talk about something else. I feel like that sort of 80s band that had that one hit show, which was like, Cherry Pie, and they have to go and sing it over and over again. I want to talk about other things now. I'm excited to talk about it, actually. It's turned out.
I think, Cherry Pie. I'm like, wow, just had a flashback for a moment there. I'm
From the
like, wait,
80s.
whoa. Let me come back. I agree. I think, I've spent 20 years in enterprise infrastructure, and I do think it would be great to see that become something we don't talk about anymore, we just expect it. And, looking to the future and looking at where things are going, we're here with the Cloud Foundry community. You've obviously spent a great deal of time with another open source community called Kubernetes. As we look at, and we've talked about it on main stage today quite a bit, the convergence of the technologies, but also the convergence of the communities. What would you like to see, or where do you think we can take this?
It's interesting. When I look at the two communities, they have very different characters, right? Like, what we worked to install with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and all of the technologies that surround Kubernetes was really the sort of, kind of open-ended organization that was focused on driving incubation. So you could think about it almost as a sort of Petri dish, where you could bring a lot of different technologies to the table, people could collaborate. Some of those technologies would blossom into a new, culture that could become, some kind of new medicine. Some of them might, fade into the background. And one of the challenges I see a lot of organizations facing today is it's hard to know where any piece of technology is, right? There's, one of the things that CNCF has done, very carefully is avoid holding specific opinions. Avoid trying to become too prescriptive about how you approach things. And as a result, for a certain class of organization, it creates this incredibly rich menu of technologies you can use. But when you start to assemble that sort of, I tend to think about you're building up this cake, which is your development stack, right? You're going to discover that, some of those layers of the cake, like Kubernetes, have a really good bake, right? Like if you watch the British baking show, they're done to perfection. And then other layers, you look at it and it's like, wow, that could have just used a little more bake. It's not quite ready yet. When I start looking at some of the technologies that are sort of emerging. And we haven't done a great job of really pulling it all together and providing the recipe that delivers an entirely consumable experience for the everyday developer, for the developer that's in there every day building applications that are powering modern businesses. Whereas on the other side of the house, I think the Cloud Foundry Foundation has done a really good job of creating that very strong experience of going from code to production in a relatively opinionated way. Now, bringing these two communities together, I think, is going to have incredibly powerful results for both communities, frankly, as we start to really bring these technologies together.
Industry shaping, one might say.
I would hope so.
And that really, I think, really brings home for me the power of open source. I feel like open source is now coming into its prime, where we're really collectively talking about both the collaborative R&D work that can happen, but also the impact it has beyond just a single technology, a single company, or a single use. And I think as we think about the future, and that's the theme of this event, is building the future, what does that look like, and how do we, as a collective community, really build towards that? And I see nothing but upside and opportunity there. So I can't have you up on stage and not talk about the elephant in the room. So for those of you that haven't been reading the news in the last couple of weeks, Pivotal has gotten acquired, or is on, what's the word?
VMware intends to acquire Pivotal.
Thank you. Sorry, I should have checked with legal first.
I should probably have checked with legal first before I answer this question.
I'm not going to ask you anything that you can't answer.
All right, so this is just between us friends, right?
Just between us. No one is listening to this conversation.
All right, sounds great.
No, I wanted to bring it up because I do think as we're talking about the future and the possibility, I view that as a super positive move. And as a recent acquiree of VMware, but also really working closely with that whole team, when you think about the future, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's a tremendously sort of positive and powerful outcome. And I think it's a real testament to this emerging trend that I think is really important in business today. We're at this pretty transformational moment in the industry. When I look at the way that everything has sort of been organized and structured and run, and when I look at what the needs of the progressive modern business are, it's increasingly apparent that the folks that are making the critical decisions, it's no longer necessarily a centralized team. A lot of the sort of significant IT decisions are being pushed into the business itself. Modern enterprises are starting to self-identify as software companies. They're starting to really think about becoming software companies. And so this older world of ticket-driven IT, where the primary interface between an IT developer and the sort of centralized IT team has been a kind of a Jira ticket, is changing. We need to move into a world where everything is modern, progressive, API-driven capabilities. And so when I think about the future and what that holds, it means we really need to bring together three things. We need to deliver a common substrate. And I think that Kubernetes is a really elegant infrastructure abstraction. It has some very favorable properties, and it's not just because I worked on building it. I think it has emerged as something that is kind of a Goldilocks abstraction. Low enough level, you can run pretty much anything. High enough level that it hides away the specifics of the infrastructure. To that, you need to pair the ability to manage. And interestingly, as we look at these organizations, their infrastructure environments are increasingly more complex. We thought that cloud was going to become a consolidatory force, but if anything, it's gone the other way, right? Like, we're having to deploy to multiple clouds. We're having, GDPR has happened. We have to sort of maintain the segmentation of data. Edge is happening. We have thousands and thousands of edge locations that we have to manage. So you have to have that management substrate. But then most importantly, you need to create this build overlay. And that has to be not just your heritage applications, like how do we get those heritage applications, packaging them up and bring them into this environment. It's also about the COTS applications, the common off-the-shelf software that you're using every day. We haven't, as any single community, established this point of singularity, which has brought together a standard way to think about deploying the software we use every day in these environments. And I think finally, with these two communities together, we can do that. And then most importantly, I think it's about that CF push experience. It's about getting that incredibly efficient line from developers to production in the most efficient way possible. And so, when I look at this holistically, I don't think it's just about VMware acquiring Pivotal. I think this is emblematic of where we as an industry need to go. We need to look holistically. We need to think about the broader story.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I say that a lot. I think that's super important. And I think if you haven't caught the subtext on the stage today, we're really talking about how do we evolve, how do we continue to grow to achieve that goal. Because I do think there's a ton, we bring so much to the table as Cloud Foundry, but there's so many exciting things happening as how do we bring all of these things together to solve the ultimate problem. And that's really why we're all here, I hope. So I could sit here and chat with you all day because obviously there's a ton of interesting things happening in this world, but I am also going to let you go for now. But Craig is going to be around if you would like to just stalk him and find him.
Sounds great. And hit me up on Twitter. All right.
Thank you so much, Craig, for coming.